It was a cold December evening, just a week before Christmas. My family traditionally spends a holiday in our summer house in the Hamptons, New York. The Hamptons are eerily peaceful this time of year, as many of the mansions there are owned by wealthy individuals who often have several other residences around the country. My father and I arrived first, ahead of the rest of the family, since my mom and sisters still had work commitments until the weekend. At that time, my dad was already retired, and with school on break for me, it seemed like the perfect time to head out early. Our Hamptons house, nestled on a quiet dead-end road, has enough bedrooms for everyone. As usual, my dad took care of the heating, water, and all the little things that needed attention after being away for months. I brought my PS3 along to keep entertained, spending the first day diving into games in my room. On that first night, a fierce snowstorm rolled in. Another reason we chose to arrive early, to avoid the treacherous road conditions that would worsen in the coming days. The next morning, I woke up to the sounds of the storm outside and made my way to the kitchen. As I poured myself a cup of coffee, my dad asked, "When did you build a snowman?" Confused, I responded, "What do you mean?" He pointed toward the backyard. "The snowman out there." I turned to look out the window, and there, amidst at least 2 feet of freshly fallen snow, stood a snowman. It had stick arms angled high into the air, and its head bore 2 eyes and a wide smile, both carved into the snow. The face was turned toward the window. "I didn't build that," I replied, a chill creeping into my voice. My dad, thinking it was a harmless prank, shrugged it off. "Must be the neighbor's kids," he said. I figured he was right, and I didn't give it much thought. However, that night, things took a dark turn. I was fast asleep when a sudden thump against my window jolted me awake. My heart raced, and I quickly pulled the blankets over myself, hoping to remain unseen by whatever might be lurking outside. After several minutes, doubt began to creep in. Maybe it was just snow falling from the roof and hitting the window. I cautiously got up to peek outside, but what I saw made my blood run cold. Another snowman stood right outside my window. Unlike the first one, this snowman's face was twisted into an angry frown, not the friendly smile from before. Terrified, I screamed for my dad. He rushed into my room, and I pointed frantically at the window. This time, his expression was no longer one of amusement. He looked serious. "I'll speak with the neighbors in the morning," he said, clearly disturbed. That night, I couldn't stay in my own room. I ended up sleeping in my sister's room, still shaken by the sight of that eerie snowman. The following morning, my dad went next door to confront the neighbors. He rang the doorbell, but no one answered. He looked around. There were no cars in the driveway, which meant the house was empty. They were the only nearby family with children, but clearly, they weren't even in town. This revelation left us with more questions than answers. For the next 5 or 6 days, nothing out of the ordinary happened, and we almost forgot about it. But then, on Christmas Eve night, things took another strange turn. The rest of the family had arrived, including all 4 of our grandparents, and we were gathered in the living room. It was still before dinner, but the darkness of evening had already settled in. Suddenly, a knock echoed through the house, distinct and firm. Oddly, the person didn't ring the doorbell. We weren't expecting anyone, and my nerves immediately kicked in. My dad walked to the door and called out, "Who is it?" A voice from the other side answered, sounding desperate. "Please let me in. I need help." The door had no peephole, and we couldn't see who was there. My dad asked again, "What's wrong?" The voice replied, "I have no one to spend Christmas with. Please help me." We all exchanged uneasy glances, the tension in the room thickening. Without hesitation, my dad shouted, "Leave now, or we'll call the police." The voice on the other side quickly responded, "Okay, I'll go. Please, don't call the police." And just like that, the person left. My dad never opened the door, but the connection between the bizarre snowman and the stranger at our door became clear. We couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Christmas morning arrived, and as we gathered around the house, we noticed something taped to the front door, a note. I can still remember its words clearly. I just wanted to have a little fun. I built the snowman for the boy in the house. I don't have anyone to spend the holiday with. Hurts in one way or another. I can't help but think that whoever left that note and built those snowmen was unstable, mentally unwell. It's hard to believe it was just some harmless joke, especially after he came to our door. There was something about his actions that felt dangerous. Even if he didn't have hostile intentions, what he did, his fixation on our house, was unsettling enough to make him a serious threat. It was Christmas of 2016, and my name is Andre. At that time, I was 21 years old. Our family was celebrating the holidays at my Uncle Joshua's place in downtown Miami. Being from Connecticut, we were all quite unaccustomed to the warmth of Miami around Christmas time. It was the Friday before Christmas Eve when my brother Nico and I, both young and single, decided to take full advantage of being in Miami. We had heard about a series of Christmas-themed parties happening at clubs and bars around the city. Nico, who was 18 at the time, had a fake ID, so we figured he could pass as older. We first tried a club on Miami Beach that was advertising a Christmas event. The line was filled with people wearing Santa hats, creating a festive vibe. But when we got to the front, the bouncer not only demanded a $100 cover charge, but also caught Nico's fake ID. So we left and tried a bar not too far away. This one also had people sporting Santa hats. Seems like a Christmas tradition in Miami on the weekend. While we were at the bar, Nico struck up a conversation with an older woman. I could hear most of what they were saying. She seemed to be in her mid-40s and repeatedly told Nico how much she liked younger guys, especially ones with Hispanic accents. Honestly, it was a bit unsettling, and I found it kind of creepy. But Nico, probably flattered by the attention, didn't seem to mind. I didn't interfere and let him enjoy himself. The woman wore a blue Santa hat and a Christmas sweater that was more revealing than festive. Their conversation dragged on for what felt like forever, so I ended up chatting with the guy sitting next to me at the bar. Then, out of nowhere, Nico tapped me on the shoulder and told me he was leaving with a woman. I nodded, said, "All right," and wished him well. I wasn't bothered by it. I stayed at the bar for a little longer, but eventually I called an Uber to head back to my uncle's place. I assumed Nico would be spending the night with the woman, so I left without a second thought. The Uber ride was uneventful, but as I was in the Uber, my phone suddenly rang. It was Nico calling. I picked up, but all I heard was static. At first, I thought he might have accidentally pocket dialed me, but then I distinctly heard a man's voice in the background, someone who definitely wasn't my brother. Suddenly, another male voice could be heard, this one yelling angrily. I tried calling out Nico's name repeatedly, hoping for some sort of response, but the call abruptly ended. Needless to say, this was unnerving. I had been under the impression that Nico was alone with the woman, so hearing other voices raised serious concerns. I tried reaching him again, dialing his number at least 10 times before someone finally answered. But instead of Nico, I heard the voice of an older man, his voice incredibly deep. I asked who it was, and the man claimed he had found Nico's phone on the sidewalk. I asked if he could bring it to my uncle's house or meet me somewhere, but the man didn't answer. Instead, there was muffled conversation in the background, followed by Nico's voice, screaming my name, calling for help. Then, the call dropped. My heart was pounding. I immediately told the Uber driver to pull over. I was panicking, frantically trying to reach anyone in my family, but it was late and nobody was picking up. I explained what had happened to the driver, who advised me to call the police right away. I didn't hesitate. The police arrived at my uncle's house, where I woke everyone up and informed them that Nico was in trouble. We worked together to provide a detailed description of the woman from the bar and the time he left. Then my dad and I, along with the police, headed to the bar where Nico had been earlier. As we were on our way, I got a call from a random number. It was Nico, gasping for breath, barely able to speak into the phone. He told me he'd been kidnapped but had managed to escape. He was using a stranger's phone to call. We rushed to the address Nico gave us, a sketchy street somewhere in North Miami. When we found him, he was in bad shape. His face was battered, both eyes swollen and bruised, and his belongings had all been stolen. Nico explained everything. He'd left with the woman, who had promised to call him an Uber or Lyft. But when they arrived at the pickup point, which was in a quiet alley, things took a terrifying turn. It wasn't an Uber at all, it was a trap. Once inside the car, two men grabbed him, pinned him down, and threatened to shoot him if he didn't stay quiet. Nico kept quiet, which explained the bloody face and the bruises around his eyes. The men took everything from him, his phone, his wallet, his keys, and whatever else he had. Eventually, the car came to a stop and the grip on Nico loosened. In that moment, he saw his chance and bolted from the car. The men didn't chase him. The car just sped off, vanishing into the night. Nico was convinced that if he hadn't run, they would have killed him and dumped his body somewhere. The police, it seemed, could never track down the woman from the video footage at the bar. Nico mentioned that none of the men wore masks, which made him even more certain they intended to kill him. It was an awful end to what should have been a joyous holiday weekend, but in the end, we were just grateful he was alive. That Christmas night, we were all abruptly awakened by Nico's frantic screams. He was shouting that, "She's in the house." I rushed to him, trying to pull him out of whatever nightmare he was trapped in. But hearing him yell those words brought back memories of that unsettling smile from the woman, and it made me sleep with one eye open that night. A couple of years later, my brother Nico and I bought a small house. We decided to host our first Christmas there as a way to get the family together and show them our new place. We don't have a huge family, so it was just the three of us, our parents, an aunt and uncle, a cousin, and my sister with her two sons. My sister and her husband arrived first to help with cooking and preparing, and they brought their dog Mika along. Since they lived a couple of hours away, they would be staying the night, but the rest of the family lived under an hour away and would be heading home after dinner. As we sat down for Christmas dinner, the conversation turned to some recent news. There had been a series of murders in our area. Bodies discovered in the woods nearby. The mood in the room shifted. It wasn't a topic we wanted to linger on, and my mom and sister quickly steered us away from it, insisting we focus on the holiday and leave the unsettling subject behind. After dinner, we relaxed in the living room, sipping wine while a Christmas movie played softly in the background. The conversations flowed easily, and as the evening wore on, family members began to trickle out until only my brother, my sister, her husband, and their kids remained. The children went to bed first, and the adults stayed up, enjoying more wine and chatting. Later, around 10 p.m., my girlfriend arrived to join me for the rest of the evening, since her family had already left. As the night wore on, Christmas came to an end, and it was finally time to head to bed. I was woken up by my girlfriend gently shaking me. The room was still dark, and I squinted at the clock next to my bed. It was just past 2 in the morning. I asked her what was wrong, and she whispered for me to listen. As I strained to hear, I noticed Mika, my sister's dog, growling in the hallway. Curious, I slipped out of bed and walked into the hall to investigate. To my shock, I saw that the back door to the house was wide open, and a cold breeze swept into the room. Nico was standing near the door, peering out into the dark. I checked the yard, but saw no sign of anyone. Then, from the darkness outside, I heard my brother's voice calling my name. His voice echoed from what sounded like a distance in the woods. Worried that he might be in trouble, I quickly returned to my room to tell my girlfriend what had happened. I threw on my shoes and coat, grabbed a flashlight, and headed outside. There was a light dusting of snow on the ground, enough to reveal footprints leading from the back door, down the deck and toward the woods. I called out to Nico, my voice loud and clear. To my relief, I heard him call my name in response. It was unmistakably him, but strangely, his voice sounded just as distant as before, as though he was deeper in the woods. I moved further into the woods, following the trail, but the footprints began to fade away. Soon, they disappeared entirely, leaving me with nothing to guide me. Panicked, I screamed, "Where are you? What's wrong?" But Nico's voice only answered with my name, each time just as far away. The feeling of isolation grew stronger as I ventured further into the woods. I didn't want to get lost, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. In a final attempt, I called Nico's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I pressed on, deeper into the woods, but now, Nico's voice was nowhere to be heard. Only the soft whisper of the breeze. Then, out of nowhere, my phone rang, cutting through the eerie quiet. I hoped it was Nico, but it was my girlfriend. I answered and she told me, "George is in his bedroom right now." Confused, I asked how that was possible. I had been hearing his voice calling out to me the entire time. I quickly asked her to check if my sister's husband was still on one of the pull-out couches. She confirmed he was. It was then that a wave of unease washed over me. I suddenly felt as though I wasn't alone in the woods, like someone could grab me from any direction. I turned back, panic rising, and ran as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I saw the light from my backyard growing clearer through the trees. Once I reached the safety of my house, everyone was awake. George and the others looked horrified when I explained what had happened. The growling dog, the open back door, and the strange footprints leading into the woods. But the most unsettling part was that I was certain the voice I had been hearing belonged to George, yet whoever was out there knew my name. We debated calling the police for about half an hour before we decided to do so. A police officer came, asked a few questions. If anything had been stolen, if we knew of anyone who might have been involved, and after reassuring us to call back if anything else happened, he left. Although I didn't know if the events were connected to the recent murders happening in our county, I felt it was worth mentioning. Nothing more occurred that night, but to this day, we can't explain any of it. I still find myself uneasy, especially near the woods after dark. The memory lingers, and the fear hasn't quite left me.